Graham in Devon, you might like to know that there is a sequel to Marley and Me. Did you know this?
Go on.
It's called Marley and Me, The Puppy Years.
Oh, for heaven's sake.
Apparently it is.
Yeah, great. The Awakening, which is a sort of... The best way of describing it is it's a sceptical ghost story set in the wake of World War One from director and co-writer Nick Murphy. And the story is Rebecca Hall is a no-nonsense rationalist who has pretty much made a career debunking fake parapsychics. In the wake of the Great War, there's obviously a massive amount of grieving and death and tragedy. People looking for anything to sort of give order to their lives. And at the very beginning, we see her effectively unravelling what looks like being a séance in which it seems like spirits of the dead are making contact, but no, the whole thing it's a con trick. It becomes apparent also that underneath this rationalism is, from her character, a desire to find something that is actually intangible. That actually, in her attempts to debunk all this stuff, she's looking for the truth. It's rather like there is somebody, a magician or somebody who was
Harry Houdini.
who has offered £1 million to anybody who can...
James Randi.
Fine, who's offered £1 million to anyone who can actually demonstrate any form of parapsychic or telekinetic...
His cheque is safe.
His cheque is safe,
Yes.
although the question is whether or not actually what he wants is for somebody to do it. Well, certainly there is the case in this character that is the suggestion. Anyway, she gets a call from a school where a pupil seems to have died of fright. The boys are talking of the figure of a child with a twisted face being seen on the grounds. There is, in the back of all this, some talk about a child disappearing in horrible circumstances in the past. Everything is very murky. She is called in by the headmaster and also by the matron, Maud, played by Imelda Staunton, to come and see if she can figure it all out. So the obvious reference point for this, at the back of all of this is Shirley Jackson's Haunting of Hill House, which I think Stephen King in Dance Macabre says is pretty much the uber text for so many modern ghost stories. That idea about the house which you're visiting for the first time, but actually there's a sense of returning and discovering yourself, that people are looking for something else. All that is there, and obviously there's famously adaptations of that. Robert Wise's The Haunting, and there was a hideous sort of Jan de Bont remake. And then I suppose as more recent touch points, you'd think of The Others, you'd think of Devil's Backbone, the Guillermo del Toro movie, which is the sort of the sister movie to Pan's Labyrinth, or the brother movie to Pan's Labyrinth, and then I think most clearly The Orphanage. Now, if I say that the film is not on a par with The Orphanage and with Devil's Backbone, that's not to say that it's not actually very enjoyable and very well made. It's very interesting that at the same time that horror seemed to become completely sort of overrun by really boring, gratuitous, so-called torture porn drivel, which was just played to the lowest common infantile denominator, that there has been a sort of a resurgence of what we think of as classic old ghostly chillers. I think the reason that Juan Antonio Bayon's The Orphanage did so well was that it reminded you of what it was that an awful lot of rather superior horror was like. Now, this is not to say that there are two camps of horror, which is explicit horror and inexplicit. Explicit is bad, suggested horror is good, because you think, like, for example, just recently we had The Kill List, which has extraordinary explicit moments in it, but I still think is a really, really good modern horror story. What this has is a number of things. Firstly, a terrific performance by Rebecca Hall. It's interesting that in the same way you think of Nicole Kidman and The Others, you think you think of what happens in The Orphanage. You think of those. They're all those movies. Belen Rueda in The Orphanage. It's absolutely fantastic. In fact, I gave her the Kermode Award for Best Actress for that year. It's interesting how the horror genre often gets a very bad rap as being something which is, in which women are used as objects and women are treated badly, and yet there are certain strands of horror in which you get these extraordinary performances. This movie hangs on Rebecca Hall's performance in the same way that Don't Look Now hangs on Julie Christie's performance, in the same way that Orphanage hangs on Belen Rueda's performance. You see the world through those characters' eyes, and she does a really good job. She's in pretty much every scene, and it's a complicated story to deal with. It's dealing with with grief, and it's a period setting, and it's something which has to work pretty hard not to be hokey, and does it pretty well. There is clearly coming through the trees, it's in the trees, a twist, which I have to say that when it comes felt rather unsatisfactory to me, in that it was too big of a twist for the story to cope with.
Too big of a twist.
Too big of a twist.
That makes sense?
Yeah, I think that's grammatically correct. Too big of a twist for the story to hold. But by the time that came, I thought that it had done a good enough job as establishing all the things that it wanted to establish, which is that it's about melancholia. It's essentially about as with all ghost stories, they're about melancholia, grief, memory, loss.
And not about ghosts.
And not about ghosts.
Or spying.
or spying, or war, or geodesic domes in space. Not about any of those things. There are, it looks very nice. It's very, very well directed. There's lots of, sort of creaks and shadows at the edge of the frame, which are very well handled. There are a couple of shots that look to me to have been taken directly from Guillermo del Toro's Devil's Backbone, and there's no problem with that at all. If you're going to reference a film, reference something like that. It's also interesting that if you think back, Gothic melodrama, what used to be referred to as women's pictures. I mean, it is really strange the way that all those things tie together. The era of great Hollywood melodramas. Hollywood used to make movies that were called women's pictures, which we now think of as being, great melodramatic stories. When you bring that forward to horror, because so much of horror is to do with the internal psyche, it's to do with, with psychoanalysis, it's to do with, the psychology of dreaming, the psychology of fantasy. Actually, this idea that horror is in any way a sexist genre just completely falls apart. What I think you have here is a well-made, not earth-shaking, but a well-made and honourable attempt to do an old-school horror movie with a modern sensibility that is raised above the ordinary by the fact that its central performance is terrifically well handled. And despite the fact that in the end I think it loses something in that last movement, the goodwill up until that last movement is enough that, you think, fine, I will embrace that quite happily. It's a good, solid British ghost movie, and good for it.
The good news, Mark, that Marley and Me, the Puppy Ears has already gone straight to DVD.